The USB drive wasn't even the fancy kind, just a black rectangle with a fatting logo and a cracked cap. But it sat between us on the conference room table like it had teeth, like it could bite. My boss, Curtis, didn't touch it. Neither did I, not yet, because we both knew what it held: 8 weeks of my life, my late nights, my weekends, my name erased. I'll rewind because this story doesn't start with the USB drive. It starts with a meeting, or more specifically, the moment I realized I was invisible in one. The setting was our company's client review for Graywell Financial, a big client, the kind you don't screw up with. Our small but scrappy firm, Kessler Strategies, had been trying to land a long-term strategy and analytics retainer with them for over a year. This pitch was going to be the deciding factor. I'd built the pitch deck from scratch, researched the market data, created the modeling framework, wrote the language for each slide, designed the visuals, refined the narrative arc, and rehearsed the data explanations so a fourth grader could follow them. It was mine, fully mine, the culmination of months of small nods from Graywell's project managers, all of whom I'd worked with directly. But when the time came for the presentation, Curtis, our director of strategic accounts, waltzed into the room like he'd built it himself. Not just the room, the entire concept. He didn't invite me to present. Didn't even mention my name. I was there, seated 2 chairs down, clicking through the slides as his assistant. Every word he spoke was a summary of the points I'd agonized over. The insights he shared about millennial wealth migration, the behavioral index I'd coded into the report, he relayed them like they'd simply floated into his mind during a morning jog. It wasn't just humiliating. It was surgical. Afterward, the Graywell team clapped, thanked Curtis, and said they'd be in touch. One of them, Lena, the VP of Portfolio Strategy, gave me a puzzled glance on her way out, like she was trying to place my face. Her eyes lingered, then she left. Back at my desk that afternoon, I stared at a Slack message from Curtis that simply read, "Great work prepping the slides, let's debrief Monday." Prepping. Not building, not presenting, just prepping. That weekend, I didn't go out, didn't watch the game, didn't call my dad back. I just sat in my apartment, reheating soup and refreshing my inbox like some kind of punishment ritual. I kept wondering, was I imagining things? Was this just how the game worked? But then Monday came, and something changed. Lena called the office directly. Curtis wasn't in yet, so reception transferred her to me, probably assuming I was handling the account. I nearly dropped the phone when her voice came through. "Hi, this is Lena Carpenter from Graywell. I wanted to speak with, is this Jay?" "Oh yes, this is Jay." "Perfect," she said. Her tone shifted, like the weight she'd been carrying all morning had just moved off her chest. "I was hoping to speak with you directly. We had a few follow-up questions from the deck." I paused from the one Curtis presented. Another pause on her end. "Right, the one that had your behavioral risk segmentation overlay. That was your work, wasn't it?" I sat up straighter, my chest filled, and my voice tried to keep steady. "Yes, that was mine." Lena let out a short laugh, not mocking, more like confirmation. "I thought so." What followed was a 40-minute conversation about the framework I'd developed, the way I'd tuned the segmentation model to reflect actual financial behavior rather than demographics. She was sharp, asked real questions, not just the kind you ask to be polite. By the end, she said, "I'll be honest, Jay, I was confused Friday. You were in the room but not really acknowledged. Thought maybe I was losing it." I swallowed hard. "Not your fault," I said, "just how the team decided to structure things, I guess." She murmured, "Well, that won't do going forward. I'm looping you directly on comms." And just like that, she hung up. I stared at the receiver like it had bitten me. When Curtis got in later that morning, I didn't mention the call. Neither did he. But I knew something had shifted. That week, I started getting CC'd on Graywell email chains, some directly addressed to me. Curtis didn't say a word. I noticed him standing near the printer one afternoon, just holding a piece of paper and staring at it for longer than it would take to read. He was thinking, calculating, I could feel it. And then came the next all-hands meeting. Kessler's all-hands weren't glamorous. We gathered in the small glassed-in space with boxed bagels and room-temp coffee. A projector flickered, mostly used to show quarterly numbers and vague initiative blurbs from the founders. That day, Curtis stood up after the CEO finished rambling about account growth. He cleared his throat and clicked to a new slide. "Our team has been making great strides with Graywell," he began. Last quarter's campaign earned us an internal recommendation for long-term retainer status. That was thanks to some smart thinking from the strategic team. Special shout-out to our data guys. He didn't say my name. Not once. I didn't flinch, just kept chewing my stale sesame bagel, but others glanced at me. A few of them had heard. Office rumors move faster than Wi-Fi. Later, Nina from design bumped into me by the fridge and said, "Wait, weren't you the one who built that Greywell deck?" I shrugged, apparently not. She didn't laugh, just nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece clicked in her head. Here's the thing about people like Curtis. They don't need to yell, they erase you quietly, with a smile, with a forward of your PDF that has his name in the footer, with a nod in a meeting where you don't speak, and if you protest, you sound petty, ungrateful, emotional. But Lena's call, her asking for me by name, had lit something I'd spent years trying to snuff out. The belief that maybe, just maybe, I had value beyond being someone's backup. So I started tracking. Every document I built after that went through version control. Every email I sent had metadata backups. Every Slack DM, every spreadsheet edit, I logged it, not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted evidence. One Friday afternoon, Curtis asked me to bring my latest behavioral projection model to his office. He was standing behind his desk when I arrived, sleeves rolled up, looking over his glasses like some benevolent mentor. "Jay," he said, "this work you've been doing, it's solid, no question." I waited. He gestured to the chair, "Sit down." I did. "We've got another deck going out to Greywell next week. I think it makes sense if I present again. They know me, it maintains continuity." I blinked once. Lena been emailing me directly. He gave a non-committal nod. Of course, she's detail-oriented, but the face of the company matters, you know. Clients like consistency, leadership. I nodded slowly. He leaned forward. "You're on the right track, Jay. Keep building. This is good for your growth. Let me handle the delivery." That's when he slid the USB drive across the desk. "I'll plug this in during the pitch. Thanks again." It sat there, black, unremarkable, but I didn't reach for it. Instead, I said, "You know, Curtis, I've got the files backed up already. I'll send Lena the version through our team Dropbox just in case she wants to annotate." A flicker crossed his face. He smiled too quickly. Sure, that works." But his hand didn't move to take the USB back. Later that night, I stayed in the office late. Just me, my laptop, and the city lights outside the 12th floor window. I looked over my old performance reviews, my emails, the messages where Curtis had complimented the team effort when it had been just me grinding on a deadline. I kept thinking about Lena's voice on the phone. "That was your work, wasn't it?" It was. And someone had finally seen me. The following Monday, the mood around the office shifted. It was subtle. A pause in hallway greetings, fewer glances in my direction, a curious quiet that seemed to hum just beneath the surface of every conversation. People weren't ignoring me, they were watching. I didn't fully understand why until I walked past the glass-walled conference room and saw Curtis holding court with the VP of HR, Jillian. His tone was calm, almost rehearsed, but his hands moved a little too much. Jillian was nodding but not smiling. She was holding a yellow legal pad and writing slowly. He saw me as I passed, didn't stop talking, just locked eyes with me for half a second longer than he needed to. The memo came out an hour later. Reminder, all client-facing communications must route through assigned account leads unless otherwise approved. No names, no accusations, but it was obvious who it was for. I didn't say anything, not to HR, not to my team, not even to Lena. But I did something else instead. That night, I added a small feature to our internal analytics platform, the one I'd built the predictive model on, a tracker. It wouldn't alert anyone, wouldn't break anything. It simply noted who accessed the backend code and when. The next morning, the logs showed something new, a login at 1:13 a.m. Curtis. The project name, Greywell Prototype JDRev6 XLSX. My initials still in the title, still his for the taking. The real change happened 2 days later, and it wasn't dramatic, no fireworks, no big confrontation. It started with an email. Subject: Greywell Retainer Final Review Wednesday. From Lena Carpenter. To me, Curtis. CC two other Graywell execs, our CEO and our firm's director of client partnerships. The body of the email was just one line. Let's have Jay walk us through the model, he's closest to the framework. No emoji, no flattery, just clear direction. I felt a bead of sweat roll down my spine. Curtis replied within 2 minutes. Of course, Jay has been instrumental. I'll support where needed. I didn't respond right away. I just reread Lena's sentence. Not can Jay help, not let's loop in Jay, but let's have Jay walk us through the model. I prepped for 3 days straight. It wasn't about ego anymore, it was about clarity. I knew the model inside and out, but explaining it to stakeholders, without sounding like I was trying to prove something, would take precision, confidence without arrogance. The night before the call, I stood at my bathroom sink brushing my teeth, watching my own face in the mirror, noticing the circles under my eyes, the slight twitch in my left cheek from clenching my jaw too often. "You got this," I whispered, mouth full of foam. It sounded stupid, but I needed to hear it, even from myself. The morning of the presentation, Curtis was unusually upbeat. He breezed past my desk with a coffee in each hand and offered me one. "No hard feelings, right?" he said, smiling like nothing had ever happened. I took the coffee not because I trusted him, but because I wanted to see if he'd try anything. We entered the Zoom room 5 minutes early. Lena joined right on time. So did the CEO of our firm, Marcus, and 2 Graywell execs I'd only emailed in passing. Curtis opened the call with some light banter, talked about the weather in Chicago, asked about someone's new puppy. Then Lena said, "Let's get started, Jay." Just like that, the floor was mine. I clicked share screen and took a breath. Thanks, Lena. Everyone, what I'll walk you through today is the behavior-first segmentation model we designed after analyzing over 1.2 million anonymized client records across 6 financial behaviors. The idea is to predict not just who a customer is demographically, but how they make decisions. I was halfway through the first chart when I saw Marcus, our CEO, sit forward. Then one of the Graywell execs started scribbling notes. Lena just nodded, focused. By the time I reached the 3rd slide, a visualization of migration patterns and cross-product triggers, I felt it. They weren't humoring me. They were listening. Really listening. Curtis hadn't said a word since the first minute. When I finished, Lena unmuted. "Thank you, Jay, that was exactly the clarity we needed." Then she added something that made Curtis twitch. "Let's make sure any future presentations come from Jay's end. It'll keep the voice consistent." After the call, Curtis closed the laptop slowly and looked at me. "Nice job," he said. "Glad we could pull that off together." Together. I smiled back. "Thanks, Curtis. Let me know if you need the updated version for your records." That was the last polite thing I said to him for weeks. The next few days were a strange limbo. I was still technically under Curtis's org chart, but I was looped directly into Graywell's strategy team. They started asking for feedback on proposals, inviting me to informal review calls, even requesting a one-on-one workshop the following Friday. Curtis wasn't invited. Instead, he began CCing himself on every email I sent. One day I tested it. I sent a Slack message to Lena with a screenshot of the revised model structure. 2 hours later, Curtis emailed her the same screenshot. No context, no message body, just the file. Lena replied, "Already received from Jay, thanks." A simple sentence, but it lit Curtis up. He messaged me 5 minutes later. "Curtis, let's make sure we're aligned on messaging before sending anything out to clients, okay?" I didn't respond. Instead, I created a folder called Client Comms J in our shared drive, made it view-only, and sent Lena a link with edit access on the final files. Curtis couldn't touch them. The final straw came the following Monday. I walked into the office and found Curtis already in my cube, not sitting, standing, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "You've been making independent decisions," he said. I tilted my head. "Clarify." "Looping clients, setting up your own deliverables. You're not a director, Jay." "Correct," I said. "I'm not." He stepped closer. "I need to know what you're working on at all times." I looked down at my desk. At the black USB drive from before, still sitting there from that last meeting, I picked it up slowly and turned it over in my palm. You mean this project, the one I built end-to-end while you took credit? His face flushed. I don't like your tone. I don't like being erased. He stormed out. 30 minutes later, I got an HR invite. Subject: performance alignment discussion. Attendees: J.D. Curtis F. Jillian HR. Date: Wednesday 3:00 p.m. I didn't panic. Instead, I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Curtis Credit Trail. Inside, screenshots, Slack exports, email threads, access logs, version histories, even audio memos from a couple late nights where I'd narrated what happened, just to keep the timeline clean. At 2:58 p.m. on Wednesday, I walked into HR with that folder printed, clipped, and labeled. Jillian greeted me with a half smile. J. Curtis was already seated. I sat, placed the folder on the table, slid it gently toward her. Curtis frowned. What's that? Documentation, I said calmly, of the last 4 months. Jillian looked at the cover. Her eyes moved across the tabs. I saw her mouth tighten as she flipped to the emails. Curtis tried to speak, but Jillian held up one hand. I think we need to pause this meeting, she said. Jay, thank you for coming prepared. Curtis, I'll follow up with you separately. He stood. This is outrageous. You're siding with Curtis, she said sharply. Step out now. He left. And for the first time since I started at Kessler, I exhaled. The air tasted different. Like it belonged to me. 2 days after the HR meeting, Curtis's nameplate was gone from his office door. No memo, no company-wide announcement, just a quiet disappearance like a bad smell dissipating after someone finally opens a window. People noticed. They didn't say anything, but I could feel it in the way heads turned when I walked down the hallway. The nods were slightly deeper, the smiles more careful. No one wanted to be the next person on my radar. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt exhausted. You don't win against people like Curtis and come out untouched. You just survive a little smarter. A week passed then too. I started getting requests from other teams. Hey Jay, quick question. How did you set up that decision tree in the Graywell model? Mind giving a quick rundown to the onboarding team on how you visualize behavior flows? It wasn't flattery. It was need. People had realized that I wasn't just the guy who got stepped on, I was the one who knew how the machine ran. And now that Curtis wasn't around to put a lid on things, they wanted to know what I knew. Still, I kept my head down. Worked the same hours, drank the same burnt coffee, ate lunch alone most days, not out of habit anymore, but out of protection. I didn't know who to trust. Then one Friday afternoon, Lena called again. Jay, she said, we've got something new. Her voice had that edge, the one I'd learned to recognize. It wasn't nervousness, it was excitement lined with caution. She went on, Graywell's looking to roll out a regional beta using your segmentation model. 12 cities, full product suite trial. My heart thumped once hard. You're serious? As a heart attack, she said, and they want you to lead the pilot, not your firm, you. I didn't answer immediately. Lena filled the silence. It would mean jumping ship, consulting direct. We'd contract you independently for now with potential full-time if the beta succeeds, but only if you're interested. I ran my fingers across the edge of my desk. My first instinct was fear. I'd fought to be seen, now someone wanted to hand me the wheel. Could I handle that? Or was I just good at being the guy behind the curtain? That night I walked home instead of taking the subway. It was cool out, one of those late spring evenings where the sky is too bright for the hour and smells vaguely like cut grass and pavement dust. I passed a kid on a scooter zooming down the sidewalk without a helmet. His dad jogged behind him, panting, trying to keep up. I couldn't help but smile. Movement, that was the point, wasn't it? I got home and pulled out a sheet of paper, drew a line down the middle. Pros on one side, cons on the other. Pros: creative freedom, direct impact, higher pay, finally mine. Cons: no safety net, no Curtis to take the fall, no office to hide in. I stared at the list until the ink started to blur. Then I wrote one more thing at the very bottom of the pros column. She asked for me by name. Monday morning, I handed in my 2-week notice. I gave no drama, no grand speeches. Just a typed letter and a handshake with Marcus, our CEO. He didn't seem surprised. Graywell, he asked. I nodded. He sighed, should have seen this coming. You're one of the good ones, Jay. We just didn't see it fast enough. It was the closest thing to an apology I ever got. The final 2 weeks felt like floating. Everyone wanted a piece of me before I left: documentation, access keys, handoff notes. I did it all without resentment, not for them, for myself. I wanted to leave clean. No burned bridges, no scorched earth. My last day, Nina from design left a sticky note on my monitor. Told you were the one who built the deck. I smiled and tucked it into my bag. The Graywell contract kicked off like a slingshot. 12 cities meant 12 stakeholder teams. I was bouncing between calls, building local insights, customizing the segmentation logic for regional quirks. It was chaos, but it was my chaos. I rented a co-working desk for the first month just to feel structure. My mornings started with black coffee and a legal pad checklist. My nights ended with late calls to Lena, hashing out pivot points and recalibrating KPIs. We weren't coworkers, we were collaborators. One night, after our 5th 12-hour day in a row, she messaged me on Slack. Lena, you ever sleep? Me. Only in 30-minute bursts between client fire drills. Lena, Sam, you're doing great, BTW. Me. Thanks, so are you. Lena, I'm glad we found you. Me. I'm glad you looked. 2 months into the contract, something strange happened. One of the Graywell execs looped me into a client pitch for a different financial institution, not Graywell, a competitor. Apparently, someone on their strategy team had heard about our beta. They wanted the same model. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a blueprint. I'd built something scalable, portable, wanted. And I had the receipts. I called my dad that night. We hadn't spoken much since the fallout with Curtis. He was an old-school guy, believed in keeping your head down and earning your stripes. When I told him what happened, what I was building now, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Proud of you, kid. Took a long road to get here." Yeah, I said, but at least now I'm driving. He laughed, a short, real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from him since I was in college. By month 4, I'd landed my first non-Graywell client. By month 6, I had an LLC. I called it Signal Fork, a nod to the behavioral branches in the segmentation model that had started it all. And one night, as I finalized a new proposal draft for a mid-sized credit union in Seattle, I caught a glimpse of my old USB drive in the drawer of my desk. Still there. Still cracked. Still holding the files Curtis had once claimed as his. But now that wasn't true anymore. Because my name wasn't just on the work anymore. It was the work. I didn't set out to start a company. I just wanted to be seen. But somewhere between surviving Curtis and securing my 3rd independent contract, I looked up and realized that people weren't just seeing me anymore. They were coming to me, seeking clarity, direction, strategy, sometimes just a second opinion from someone who wouldn't regurgitate buzzwords and take a week to say, "It depends." Signal Fork became something more than a name on a proposal. It was a lighthouse. And apparently the waters were full of people sailing blind. By month 9, I had my first employee. Marcus, not my old CEO, this was a 28-year-old data scientist I'd met in a Slack community for behavioral economics nerds. He was sharp, thought in layers, understood how to structure predictive models for actual humans, not just for pretty dashboards. When I made him an offer, he said, "You're serious?" As a heart attack, I replied, stealing Lena's line. He accepted before the end of the Zoom call. Hearing Marcus meant growing up fast. I had to build SOPs, draft contracts, set up payroll, get liability insurance. It was terrifying. But it felt good too, like I was finally walking into rooms I used to be blocked from, not asking for permission, just doing the work and doing it well. Still, I thought about Curtis sometimes. Not in the angry, bitter way I had during the HR days. More like curiosity. Where do people like him go? I got my answer in an unexpected way. An email. From someone in my old firm. Subject: confidential, need to ask you something. The body was short. "Hey Jay, sorry to bother you, hope you're well. Curtis resurfaced. He's pitching to a client using some variation of the behavioral segmentation model. We think it's your work repackaged. Any advice? I stared at the message for a full minute. Of course he had. Of course he would. I typed a single sentence in reply. Send me the deck. The file came through 10 minutes later. It was a PowerPoint. The color scheme was different, the fonts cleaner, but the bones were mine. Same architecture, same logic, even a few phrasings lifted word for word from a deck I'd built a year ago, just enough to make it look like he'd been inspired, but not so much that it screamed theft to someone who hadn't lived inside the spreadsheet formulas for 6 months straight. I felt my jaw clench. Then I felt nothing. Just a hollow sort of clarity. He hadn't learned a thing. I thought about going after him. Sending a cease and desist. Looping in a lawyer, making a mess. But I didn't. Instead, I did something pettier. I built a free version of the original segmentation framework, stripped down, open source, and published under a Creative Commons license. I posted it on Medium with a case study and a simple headline. Why Behavior Beats Demographics, a free framework for financial institutions. It got picked up on LinkedIn. A few strategy leads reposted it. Someone from a fintech startup in London asked if they could adapt it for European markets. I said yes. With attribution. My name at the bottom of every download. Curtis couldn't sell what was already free. Lena called a week later. You just gave away your IP. Not all of it, I said, just enough to make his knockoff useless. She laughed so hard she had to mute herself. When she came back on, she said, you know, you're scary when you want to be. Only when pushed. I wish I'd seen it sooner, she said, back when you were still sitting behind Curtis. You did see it, I said, you just didn't know how badly I needed to be seen. By the 1-year mark, Signal Fork had grown to a 5-person shop. We didn't have an office, just a Notion dashboard, a Slack channel, and a rotating Zoom background game. But we were landing consistent work. Mid-size credit unions, healthcare networks, even a city government wanting help with behavioral nudges around water usage. Turns out people everywhere wanted to understand how humans actually behave, not just what age bracket they fit into. Every time a new client came on board, I asked the same question. How did you hear about us? And at least once a month, someone said the words I used to dream about. Someone mentioned your name. I still kept the USB drive in my drawer. Still cracked, still irrelevant. But it stayed. Not as a reminder of who I was, just as proof I didn't need it anymore. I had newer drives now, smarter systems, better work. I had Marcus and a small team of smart misfits who believed in what we were building. And I had Lena. She wasn't just a client anymore. After Graywell rolled out the model nationally, she left the firm. Took a sabbatical. And then one day, she emailed me a one-line question. You ever think about what comes next? I wrote back immediately. All the time. We met in person 3 weeks later, first time since that awkward boardroom meeting a year and a half ago. She was wearing jeans and sneakers. I had on a shirt that didn't quite fit right. We both laughed at the formality of it. Two people who had carried each other's reputations for months, now just sitting in a coffee shop like it was no big deal. But it was. We talked for 3 hours. Not about work, not about Curtis, not even about the industry. Just about what we cared about, what we were afraid of, what it felt like to finally be building something without permission. At the end, she looked at me and said, I think we could build something big together if you want to. I nodded. Not too fast. Just enough to let her know I meant it. That night I walked home without headphones. No distractions. Just the sound of my shoes on the pavement, the hum of late buses, the low murmur of distant music spilling from an apartment window. It felt like movement. It felt like mind. 16 months after Curtis tried to wipe my name off the project I'd built, I stood on stage in a midtown conference center, holding a wireless mic and looking out at an audience of about 300. They weren't cheering. This wasn't that kind of event. These were risk officers, behavioral analysts, data leads, product heads, people who didn't clap unless something actually moved the needle, which was fine with me. I wasn't there to be liked. I was there because they finally believed my work mattered. I clicked to the next slide. Trust is behavioral, not brand. My voice didn't shake, not even once. The keynote wasn't supposed to be mine, initially. It was supposed to go to one of the graybeards from a well-funded think tank, someone with a dozen publications and half a dozen TV interviews under their belt. But 2 weeks prior, that person dropped out. The event team reached out to their shortlist. Lena's name was on it. She emailed me one line. "You ready for a bigger room?" I didn't ask how many people, I didn't ask who would be in the front row. I just wrote back, "Tell me the time." That day changed everything. Not because I said anything new, most of the core ideas I shared had been in my original model, the one Curtis had tried to claim, but because now the model had weight, results, headlines, public adoption. One slide showed the data. Graywell's customer churn had dropped by 17% in the markets that used our framework. Another showed product adoption across demographics that had previously been written off as unreachable. By the time I finished the Q&A, 2 VPs and 1 CFO had handed me their cards. Afterward, I sat backstage, sipping lukewarm water and trying to catch my breath. Lena leaned against the wall beside me. "You didn't throw up," she said. "Almost did 3 times in the hotel bathroom." She smirked. "I knew you were weirdly quiet this morning." We sat in silence for a minute, then she added, "You know what my favorite part was?" "What?" "That you never mentioned Curtis, not once." I nodded. "Wasn't his story. He did resurface again months later. Not in my inbox this time, but in a podcast. Some mid-tier tech strategy show had brought him on to talk about the future of human-centered analytics. His voice was the same. Polished, confident, full of buzzwords. But when the host asked him about predictive segmentation based on behavior clusters, Curtis stumbled. He gave a broad answer, vague, rehearsed. No mention of how friction affects cross-product migration, no reference to cohort movement under financial stress conditions, nothing. He didn't own it anymore. Maybe he never had. That night, I played the podcast once more. Then I closed the tab, deleted the file, and went back to work. Lena and I were building something bigger now. We started drafting the outlines for a new venture, a hybrid between consultancy and product platform, real-time decision nudging, ethical behavioral architecture, tools that didn't manipulate but guided, transparent, grounded. We weren't sure what to call it yet. All the cool names were taken. But it didn't matter. Because this time we weren't asking anyone's permission. On the 1-year anniversary of Signal Forks Incorporation, I walked to the same park I'd passed the day I decided to quit. Same cracked sidewalk. Same kid, maybe riding a bigger scooter now. Different me. I sat on a bench with a sandwich in one hand and my phone in the other, rereading a message that had just come in from our newest client. "Looking forward to working with your team, Jay. We've heard great things," they said to ask for you by name. I smiled. Not the smug kind. The quiet kind, the kind that settles deep in your chest and reminds you that every small, invisible battle, the ignored email, the stolen idea, the condescending nod in a meeting, was part of a path. And that path was finally mine. At home that night, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months. The old USB was still there. Still cracked. Still useless. I took it out, held it in my hand, and then walked to the trash can. Dropped it in. Closed the lid. You don't always get justice in a courtroom. Sometimes you get it in small moments of clarity. In the quiet confidence of your own voice. In a client asking for you by name. And in knowing that when someone tried to erase you, you didn't fight back with vengeance. You just kept building. Until your name was louder than their silence. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.